God bless him. He hasn't been hit by the bug.
Right.
So I just
Guys, we ready to go?
Yep.
If everybody can mute except for our presenter, it'd be greatly appreciated, so I don't have to do it for you. I will admit people as they come on. I've got 7 p.m. on the dot Eastern, September 2020. We can't wait until this year is over. Anybody know if the Orioles lost? They were down last time I looked to the Mets. So
They lost 9-2.
was it? Okay.
9-2. Yeah,
Nice
what's
job.
actually, it's still only the top of the 9th inning.
Okay. Yeah, but say goodbye.
Yeah.
Unless Bruce has any other announcements, with the exception of another issue of the newsletter going to come out probably at the end of October. I don't have any other administrative type stuff. I did send around the email of our next couple speakers for September and October. Hopefully you got that. If not, send me a message in the chat and I'll make sure you're on our email list. And I wish I had the book here tonight, but I don't. My wife won't let me buy every one that comes out. So I'm sorry, Mr. Joseph. I'll have to get it down the line.
That's okay.
Well, Peter,
But I
the
will
only
get it.
thing-
I'm
the
pretty
only-
loyal to our local chapter members here. But
Peter,
if
I
you
will
want-
say that the only thing I have to announce is that there has been no announcement, no major announcement concerning SABR 50, concerning the convention that was delayed this year onto next year. Things are on track for that, but there has been no news, just in case people are wondering about that.
Okay. You guys, don't forget, you can send, Mr. Joseph doesn't mind, send him questions through the chat as we go along. We have 2 hours. We're not bumping up against any other groups tonight, so we can go overboard if we need to. It's all up to you guys. I'm home, so hopefully everybody is comfortable and settled in, and I'll let Dan take it over.
Okay. Thank you all for having me. It looks like my son's name is on the screen here, but that's me. I'm Dan, and it's a pleasure to speak to you all tonight. I am the author of this book, Last Ride of the Iron Horse. It's about Lou Gehrig and his 1938 season. The book is about Gehrig's valiant effort to keep playing as he began to deal with the early effects of ALS, which of course is the disease frequently known now as Lou Gehrig's disease, and which would force him to retire the following year and would unfortunately lead to his death 3 years later. Before I get started, I don't need to explain who Lou Gehrig is to this crowd, but I'd like to just kind of start with where Gehrig was in his life and his career at the start of the 38 season. He was already at age 34, unquestionably the most valuable first baseman in baseball history. He had been the Yankee regular first baseman for 13 years. His consecutive game streak stood at 60 something. I forget the exact number, but it was getting close to 2,000. With him as the first baseman, the Yankees had won 6 World Championships. He himself had won 2 MVP awards, the Triple Crown. He was showing no signs of slowing down. At age 34, he had 37 homers, 154 RBIs, led the league in walks and on-base percentage. So he was just as good at 34 as he had been, say, at 24, 25. And of course, you're all familiar with his relationship with Babe Ruth. Ruth was the number 3 hitter, Gehrig was the number 4 hitter, and they were the mighty engine of Murderers Row for many years. For most of his career, Gehrig had really labored in the shadow of Ruth. But over the last 2 or 3 years before 1938, he had started to come out of that shadow. He had emerged pretty much as a star, as a very popular star in his own right. His wife, Eleanor, had encouraged him to kind of spread his wings and stand in the spotlight a little bit more. He'd been making radio appearances. He'd been doing advertisements. And at the start of 1938, he and Eleanor are making a cross-country drive. They are going out to Hollywood because Gehrig is about to film his first movie. He landed not quite a starring role, but sort of a co-starring role in a Western called Rawhide. And he spent about 3 weeks in Hollywood, kind of learning how to ride a horse and lasso and do all the things that the old Western stars did. And some people, some sports writers were very skeptical of this because they thought he's too stiff. They're trying to create some synthetic fame for him. But he was, he actually did pretty good in the movie. If you ever want to check it out, it's easily available on YouTube or, I don't know if it turns up on TV anymore, but it's a 1 hour movie and there's some entertaining scenes in there where Gehrig gets in a bar fight and he's trying to ride a horse and there's a really bad stunt double, which is easy to spot. It's a fun diversion, basically. So at the end of January, he and Eleanor drive cross-country back east, and now comes the annual salary battle with the Yankees. In the early part of his career, Gehrig had been treated pretty well by the Yankees. They gave him a 3-year contract at $25,000 per year, which is big money in 1928 when that contract was given. Of course, Ruth was making $80,000, but Gehrig didn't really mind. He felt very grateful for what he had in life. And his salary actually stayed there, right there for the next 7 years, because it was the Great Depression and he didn't feel it was right to demand a raise. So he wins the Triple Crown in 1934 and he's still making $25,000 a year. Finally, at Eleanor's urging, he starts asking for more money, and the Yankees give it to him. But then after his 1936 season, when he led the league in homers 49, he won the MVP award. The Yankees won the World Series. Jacob Rupert, the Yankees owner, and it was the owner of Rheingold, the Rheingold Brewery, I think it was, Rheingold Beer, refused to give him any raise at all. And so this turned into a battle. Gehrig held out in the spring of 37, and finally he got like a $5,000 raise, making $36,000 a year, best paid player in baseball. And then after the 37 season, now we're in the winter of 38, Rupert wouldn't give him any raise again, so now he has to hold out again. And of course, this is what baseball players had to do in these years because of the reserve clause. They couldn't be free agents. They had no leverage whatsoever other than to hold out. And Gehrig was actually engaged in kind of an interesting dual holdout, not with Joe DiMaggio, but at the same time as Joe DiMaggio. Joe DiMaggio, only in his 3rd year in the majors, was demanding $40,000, and Rupert thought this was a very entitled young man to be spending, to be asking for $40,000 only 3 years into his career, when Gehrig hadn't achieved that yet after 14 years. This gets resolved, though. Gehrig does get $39,000, still the highest paid player in baseball. DiMaggio got $25,000. So now we're getting to spring training. Gehrig gets down there a little bit late. He's a little bit rusty. But then, he normally had just kind of jumped right into spring training before without any problem. Obviously, somebody pointed out he was on the year on his gravesite is wrong. He was born in 1903. So he starts spring training and he gets his hits, and he's just kind of trying to get into game shape for the year. But an odd thing starts happening. He's only hitting singles. And the Yankee sports writers begin to notice this. He's hitting the ball, but it's just not going very far. And then there are a couple times when he stumbles going around first base, and but everyone just sort of thinks, well, he's getting older. He's he's a bit rusty after the winter. He admitted that he had not worked out at all over the winter. But he has like a 12-game hitting streak, and it's 2 days before the season, the Yankees are playing a exhibition game in Brooklyn against the Dodgers. And the sports editor of the New York Post says, "Hey, you're hitting 345. You have a 12-game hitting streak." Gehrig says, "Yeah, that's great, but I got to figure out what's wrong with my hitting. I'm swinging like I always do, and I meet the ball, but it doesn't take what he called the proper zoom." And this is, in retrospect, the first sign that Gehrig notices, publicly admits, that something is off. Something is wrong with his body. He's not playing the way he should. So the season starts, and Gehrig gets into a horrible, horrible slump. He doesn't get a hit for the first 5 games of the season, and when he finally does get a hit, he gets it, it's a double. He tries to stretch it into a triple, and he gets thrown out at third base. And a month into the season, he's hitting 109, and everyone is going, what's going on? He's never had a slump like this before. But Joe McCarthy, the Yankee manager, is not going to take him out of the lineup, even though he's definitely hindering the Yankees, because the big 2,000 consecutive games are coming up. And it would just be a tragedy if he were to not make it to that mark. So the Yankees drop him in the lineup for the first time in many, many years. They drop him down to 5th, sometimes 6th in the lineup, and they put DiMaggio 4th and Bill Dickey ahead of Gehrig. And the Yankees kind of let him work through it. But it's difficult. The fans actually are starting to boo him because he's tapping all these weak grounders. And a couple baseball people, Al Simmons, the outfielder, and Clark Griffith, who was the owner of the Senators, they say, he suddenly looks like an old man. He's not himself. He does kind of start to very gradually come around. And by May, he's hitting reasonably productively. He's up in the 270 mark, which is enough to stay in the lineup. But, normally Gehrig's a 340 hitter with lots of power, and now he's a 270 hitter. So people are still not quite mollified that everything is okay. It's to be May 30th, 1938, and the 2000th consecutive game finally arrives, and it was kind of an odd thing. The day before, the Yankees had 81,000 people in the stadium because they were playing a doubleheader with the Red Sox, and they're vying for first place. And then Gehrig's 2000th game comes up, and there are only like 7,000 people at Yankee Stadium. The Yankees didn't bother to promote it, which again strikes me as odd, and it's a little bit of a slap, I think, at Gehrig. There was a brief pregame ceremony, but it wasn't broadcast over the PA system. Not sure what was going on there. So now we get into June, and Gehrig is beginning to come out of it. He's hitting a few home runs, but not anything like his normal productivity. He has a couple encounters with Bob Feller. Now, Bob Feller at this point is 19 years old, and Gehrig is 35, so Feller is almost half his age. And it's interesting, today we talk of the 3 true outcomes, home run, walk, or strikeout. When Gehrig batted against Feller, that's pretty much what happened every time. Either Gehrig struck out, or Feller walked him, or he hit a home run. There was one time in 1937 where Feller had struck him out 3 times, but then in the 9th inning, Gehrig hit a 2-run homer to tie the game. And in fact, Feller remembered this in his autobiography more than 50 years later. He remembered that hit and what a backbreaker it was for him. And the Yankees are playing this series against the Indians in Cleveland, and the Indians are actually in first place. The Yankees are in second. The Yankees lose 3 games out of 4 because Gehrig keeps letting them down with runners on base. Just can't seem to knock anybody in. He's hitting pop fly after pop fly. And now people are saying for the first time Lou Gehrig is not going to get on the All-Star team. The All-Star game was a much bigger deal at the time than it is now. It had only been created 5 years before. All 5 years, the American League powers that be had selected Gehrig to be starting first baseman. But now there's controversy. Should he be? And of course, he should not have been, because Jimmy Fox was having a better year, Hank Greenberg was having a better year, and Hal Trotsky, the Cleveland first baseman, he was hitting .355. He was having a much better year. But when it came time to pick the rosters, they actually put Gehrig on the team. They left Trotsky off. They made Fox the starting first baseman, and they made Greenberg a backup, and Greenberg got furious because he had never been allowed to play. By this time, he had been an all-star caliber player for more than 5 years. In that 1 year, he had driven in 100 runs before the All-Star break, but he didn't get on the All-Star team because Gehrig was given that honor of starting first base. So Greenberg says, if I'm not starting, I'm not going to the game. And, when the game actually took place in Cincinnati, they started Jimmy Fox at first base, but in the 5th inning, Fox is out, Gehrig is in. Joe McCarthy was managing was managing the All-Star team, and he seemed to think that it was the natural order of things that Gehrig should be the first baseman in the All-Star game. But, a couple times in the game, again, Gehrig came up with men on base and couldn't drive them in. So we get to late July, and Gehrig, again, is really just not playing the way he normally does. He's hitting 270s again. He has 17 homers, but that's far behind what Fox and Greenberg and Trotsky are doing. And it's far behind what he normally did in an average season. A couple of years before, he had 97 RBIs by the end of July, and this year he had about 60. Funny thing, Kellogg's did a nationwide vote, through, if you bought their cereal, that is, with who's the most popular first baseman in baseball. And Gehrig, despite his struggles, still won the poll. He won it by more than 2-1 over Fox and Greenberg. And he wrote this very emotional letter to the Sporting News, thanking the fans for the honor. I just want to read a little bit of it to you. I'll just find it here in the book. All right, and it's very emotional. You can tell how much his struggles are affecting his psyche. You don't think of Lou Gehrig as the Iron Man, but he was getting worried. He said, "I hope it does not sound untruthful to say the award came as a complete surprise. Wallowing in the worst slump of my career, it didn't occur to me that the fans would think of me as a prospect for the honor. When the news came, the encouragement it gave me cannot be described by a mere phrasing of words. The feeling was so deep and profound that long after my career is ended, there will always be that warming remembrance of a great tribute paid me by the fans when psychologically I needed it most." Very not what we associate with Lou Gehrig, but it goes to show you, again, he sensed something was wrong, and he really felt it when the fans said, we still like you, we're still behind you. We get up to about mid-August now, and the Yankees are fighting the Indians for first place. They're like maybe a half game ahead, and Gehrig is still not hitting like he normally should. And sports writers have been calling for him all season to take a rest, end the streak. No, you're not hitting. You obviously need to take a break. And the fans, as I said, have been booing him, and not all the time. I mean, they still loved him, but they're frustrated with him. That might be the better way to put it. Then one day, August 7th, to be precise, Gehrig, he had just gotten some new bats from the Louisville Slugger Company. He decided to switch to a lighter bat to see if that would speed up his swing. So he goes to the plate. He has the lighter bat. He fiddles with his batting stance. And then all of a sudden, for about the next 3 weeks, Lou Gehrig returns to being the force that he always was. Up to that point in the season, his slugging percentage had been just .486. Slugging percentage is your total bases divided by your at-bats. So the more extra base hits you get, the higher the percentage. .486 was low for Lou Gehrig. But then for the next 3 weeks, he's hitting home runs, doubles, triples. He's having 4 RBI, 5 RBI, 6 RBI games. And his slugging percentage in that time is .743. Which is well above his career average. He suddenly has the old power back. And there's a writer for the New York Herald Tribune, Rudd Rennie, and let me get that quote. He noticed that things had changed. Things had changed for the better for Gehrig, and he wrote. Hold on. Rennie wrote, "He is the menace of old. The fans sense it. They greeted him yesterday with those bursts of hurrahs which they reserve for strong men whom they expect to do big things. Lou hasn't had many such receptions this year, but he's getting them now." And this period in that season, this was one of the things that motivated me to write the book, because I always thought the whole year was astounding. Gehrig was able to play the entire Yankee season. He didn't miss a game, obviously. And he still managed to hit 29 homers, drive in 114, and help the Yankees win a world championship when he was beginning to suffer the effects of ALS. He later said that he was feeling weakness in his back at this time, and he felt like he couldn't get loose. He felt sluggish, and yet he found a way to contribute to the Yankees. And this period in August, I think, is remarkable because basically it was, in effect, a temporary reversal of his ALS. I actually talked to a researcher at Duke University who studies ALS, who researches ALS, and he studies temporary ALS reversals, which are a real phenomenon. And he says it's entirely possible. We don't have a way of knowing for sure, but it's possible that Gehrig experienced a reversal of some kind during this time. It lasted about 3 weeks. In those 3 weeks, Gehrig hit 9 home runs, 1/3 of his season's total in a span of about 24 games. And the Yankees had a period where they played 6 doubleheaders in 1 week because it had been raining a lot early in the year. Gehrig played all 12 games. He played all 9 innings of all 12 games. He was hitting just as well as he had the previous couple weeks. It's just a remarkable period. Toward the end of the season, though, I think he began to wear down. He returned to hitting mostly singles. He was walking a lot, and which makes me think that he knew he couldn't hit for power, so he was just trying to get on base any way that he could. There was a home run hitting contest late in that season in St. Louis. The Browns asked Gehrig, Joe DiMaggio, and George Selkirk, who was the right fielder, the guy who replaced Babe Ruth, asked them to take part in a hitting contest with 3 of the Browns. And they had artillery experts from the U.S. Army barracks near St. Louis measure the shots. This wasn't home run derby in the sense they're trying to hit as many as possible. They're just trying to see who hits it the furthest. And Selkirk wound up winning it. He hit a ball 444 feet. Gehrig finished last out of 6. And it's no shame finishing behind Joe DiMaggio, but he finished behind a guy named Mel Mazzara, who was a part-time outfielder for the Browns, who hit 10 homers in his entire career. So again, that says, all right, his strength is beginning to wane. It's being sapped away. The Yankees did wind up winning the pennant, and Gehrig played all 4 games in the World Series. And, he did contribute. He scored 4. He got on base several times. He scored 4 runs, 1 in every game, and the Yankees swept the series 4 straight. But he didn't hit anything bigger than a single. The one time he did try to stretch a single to a double, he got thrown out at second base by a mile. He was, it wasn't even a close play. And if you watch the films of that series, you can see he was never a graceful runner, but you can get the sense that he's not quite running at his normal speed. Not slow, but not as fast as he had been a couple years earlier. Postseason comes, and Gehrig decides he's gonna take it a little bit easy. He does some fishing. He doesn't really do anything else athletic, but he does take a couple speaking engagements. The New York Herald Tribune had this annual political forum where they invited renowned speakers to come address the nation, talk about the problems of the nation. And they invited Gehrig, and they put him on a panel in the morning. When he spoke after Eleanor Roosevelt and right after, I think, Katharine Hepburn. There was a labor leader, John Lewis, who spoke, Will Hayes, who was the head of the Hollywood censorship office. Gehrig spoke, though, and he was talking about the importance of sport in the nation. And I just want to read a little bit of this. Okay, now he's talking about, I think baseball's playing a very important role in keeping this country out of a lot of trouble it might otherwise be in. He's talking about, this is 1938. He's talking about radical movements, fascist movements, things like that. He says, when the public goes out to the ballpark, it isn't gathering in dusty cellars holding meetings. When the public is discussing the pennant races, it doesn't have to work off its natural instincts or excitement in starting a war. All right, valid opinion, I think. But then he makes some comments towards the end of his speech that I think are very telling. There had been some talk, of course, in the papers that he's getting old, he's slowing down. And Gehrig said in the speech, at 35, I don't feel it necessary to start walking around with a cane or being pushed in a wheelchair. Maybe I'm just an optimist. Or maybe the game has kept my mind young, and I'm kidding myself into thinking that I'm still a long way from being the old man that the papers call me. So again, this is another sign from Gehrig that he senses there is something happening to his body, that he is not as athletic or as strong as he used to be. Nobody remarked on this at the time. The speech, he did get coverage in the newspapers, but they were mainly talking about his political comments. A couple weeks later, he spoke at Madison Square Garden, this time at a rally for a fundraiser actually, for Jewish refugees from Nazi Germany. Gehrig, as probably you know, he came from German immigrant parents. He grew up speaking German. It was a very German household, but he firmly had nothing to do, no sympathies with Nazism. And he spoke at this rally in front of 20,000 people. And here he said, well, we don't know the exact, I wasn't able to find the entire speech, but he did say, I'm glad to be in a country where I can wear the World's Fair emblem on my sleeve, 39 World's Fair was coming up, and play baseball, and not in a country where I'd have to wear the swastika. And these comments did get picked up, and Variety, the showbiz newspaper, said he wowed the audience with that and whatever else he said. So now we're in the winter of '39. The Yankees cut Gehrig's salary, even though he still had what for anyone else would be a good year. It wasn't what he normally did. They cut his salary to $36,000. He's still the best paid player in baseball. He goes down to Florida. He goes on a fishing trip right before the season starts, and his fishing buddy is actually the outdoor editor of the New York Daily News. And this guy, he says, I've been helping Gehrig get ready for the season. He's worried, but I'm helping him through it, and he's ready to go now. But once spring training starts, it's painfully aware that Gehrig cannot hit, he cannot field, he cannot run, even the way he'd been doing the previous fall. He was just slow in everything he did. He had no range at first base. He couldn't hit the ball past maybe the shallow outfield. But the Yankees refused to bench him because of the consecutive game streak. McCarthy actually gave Gehrig a little warning for the end of spring training. If you don't improve, I'm going to bench you. And Gehrig somehow, again, this is astounding given that he was really beginning to suffer from ALS. Gehrig somehow did raise his game. He had one spring training game in New Orleans, exhibition game where he had like 6 RBI, and he had another one in Norfolk where he had a couple home runs. So he did enough to stay in the lineup. But once the season starts, he just can't do anything. He gets 4 singles in 8 games, all of them weak, shallow Texas League style hits. And finally, the day comes on May 2nd, 1939, when they have to bench him. Where actually Gehrig chooses to bench himself, and McCarthy kind of gladly agrees that it's time. And I think you know what happened next. He went to the Mayo Clinic. They diagnosed him with ALS. He comes back to New York, and the Yankees have their famous Lou Gehrig Appreciation Day, which they maybe should have had when he had reached 2,000 consecutive games. That game in '38, there were 7,000 people in Yankee Stadium. For this one, for the real Lou Gehrig Appreciation Day, there are 62,000. And Gehrig gives the legendary speech, "Today, I'm the luckiest man on the face of the earth. I may have been given a bad break, but I have an awful lot to live for." That is kind of that's the stuff the book covers, and I always felt I had this idea really far back as college that I had to this was something I wanted to delve into more deeply, and I felt compelled to write this book and really dive in and really get into the depth of this story, because this year had been touched on by previous authors. Jonathan Eig in Luckiest Man, which I still think is the best Lou Gehrig biography. And Ray Robinson in, what's the name of his book? The Life and Time of the Iron Horse, or something like that, or something like that. I forget the name of it. But there had never been a book devoted to this. And there had never been in-depth study of that period in August when Gehrig had that surge, when he seemed to become his old self again. And last month, a medical journal called the RRNMF Neuromuscular Journal published a paper that I wrote with Dr. Richard Bedlack, kind of analyzing that surge in August and discussing whether it would be whether it could be considered a true ALS temporary reversal. Gehrig, after July 4th, 1939, he had stopped playing in May. He would occasionally take part in infield practice with the Yankees, just to kind of just stay involved. He traveled with the Yankees for the rest of the '39 season. They paid him his full salary, and he even got a World Series share. And then after that, he didn't exactly fade into the shadows. He got a job with the city of New York. He became a parole officer, deciding whether people got out of prison or not. He did sometimes make other radio appearances. I have a little clip here that I can play for you if we have some time. He would go to concerts. He still stayed in the public eye for at least another year. Toward the final months of his life, he stopped going to work in April of '41, and he died on June 2nd, 1941, at his home in the Riverdale section of New York. About a year later, of course, they made the movie Pride of the Yankees with Gary Cooper playing Lou. Not a favorite movie of mine, but I know some people think it's the greatest. But okay, and that's kind of the story of Gehrig's battle against ALS, focusing on 1938. So, if anyone has some questions or comments, let's open it up. Wait, I'm sorry. How do I get the sound? How do I? Oh, unmute. Hello? I'm trying to unmute.
You can't, everybody has to do it themselves.
Oh, okay. All right, David, you had a question?
I had the impression that he was in a bit of denial about his disease. Was that correct? Or have you found more?
Yeah, Well, now in public, he was. When he gave interviews to the press, I'll tell you, let me just, this was in April of '39, when he's playing his final 8 games with the Yankees. He gave several interviews. One, he said, the Yankees were in Boston. They happened to be rained out that day. And he said, "I'm improving every day." He said his teammates had pointed out defects in his batting stance and declared he was swinging more naturally now. He said the next step was to build up his legs, which he said had gone soft because he hadn't been jogging during the off season. And when the reporter said, "What about snapping the consecutive game streak?" he said, "Snapping my streak would only do me harm. I'm not tired. Taking a day off would be silly." And then to another, James Caan, who was a writer for the New York Sun, he said, "When you're down on yourself, it means everything to have the fans and the fellas on your team slap you on the back and say you're going to be okay. And I will be, just as soon as I can shake myself out of this frame of mind that this bad spring has put me in. Things are getting easier. I'll be all right." But, in fact, his teammates weren't really behind him anymore. They were complaining to Joe McCarthy that they couldn't win with Gehrig at first base because he could still catch the ball when they threw it to him, but he had no range. He really struggled to, if a ball was hit second, he was really struggling to get back to first in time to catch the ball. So yeah, he was in a certain amount of denial when facing the public. I got the impression that secretly, as early as April or March of '38, he knew something was wrong, and he knew certainly by March of '39 that something was seriously wrong.
Thank you.
Yeah. Hold on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, Anthony. Yes.
My name's Paul, actually. It's a misspelling, but that's okay.
Okay.
Now, you said that you talked with some people who did a research journal article on ALS reversal and things like that. What was their opinion, their final opinion about whether or not he had a temporary, what am I searching for?
Temporary reversal.
Temporary reversal, yes.
Yeah.
I didn't quite get what you said there before.
Well, all right. Now, the researcher I spoke with at Duke University, his name is Dr. Richard Bedlack, and he's been studying this phenomenon where ALS patients, either they plateau or maybe they experience a temporary recovery of some of their functions. And there's really in Lou Gehrig's case, there's really no way to know what happened, physically to him, because he didn't, at no time in an interview did he discuss that period publicly. He actually didn't discuss his disease very much, in radio interviews or newspaper interviews. People, I think at that time, generally, if you had cancer, it was kind of kept a secret. If you had some deadly disease, you didn't really talk about it very much. So it's hard to say what was happening. Maybe if the Mayo Clinic still has Gehrig's records, but they've never released them to the public. So unless Gehrig talked about that period in talking to the doctors at the Mayo Clinic, we can't really know. What we do know is that right before that surge in August of '38, he had switched to a lighter bat, and he had played with his batting stance a little bit. And that may have certainly helped him recover his batting stroke. I did analyze in this paper whether he simply hit a bunch of bad pitchers, if he was pitching against guys with 6.89 ERAs, but really he wasn't. He faced kind of the normal assortment of pitchers. Mel Harder, who was a good, 220 game winner for the Indians. He hit a home run off him. He did hit a home run off Bob Feller. He faced some quality pitchers like Dutch Leonard for the Senators, Johnny Allen for the Indians, Thornton Lee for the White Sox. Trying to remember some of the others. A little bit later in the season, he had a home run of Bobo Newsom. So he was, he was still hitting the good pitchers. And now the biggest days he had were off the really bad guys. He had won, I think, 6 RBI day in Philadelphia. He against 3 or 4 A's pitchers. He had a grand slam off somebody. He had a 2-run double off somebody. So I mean, but that happens to any good hitter. You face good pitchers, you face bad pitchers. So we can't really know the answer, at least unless maybe the Mayo Clinic were to release Gehrig's records. Then maybe we could have a better idea.
You think there's any way of getting them to release it? Can you get a court order or something like that, or research order?
People have asked them at various times to release the record, and they said they could only release it to family.
Oh.
Gehrig didn't have any kids, and his siblings all died when they were children. So there's really no Gehrig family left, to request the records. And I don't know why they've always kept it hidden or secret. People have asked, but they've always said no.
What you can do.
Yeah. Any other?
Dan, I put in a question on the chat line. You've indicated that Lou Gehrig didn't talk very much about his illness, but it was the question about who his closest friends among the other Yankees players were, and is it true that, as far as we know, he never discussed his health concerns with any of his teammates?
I don't think he ever sat down and discussed his symptoms and his struggles with the team as a whole. If he did, he discussed his baseball struggles with them, and like trying to help him figure out what was wrong with his batting stance and things like that. If he did discuss it with anybody, it might have been Bill Dickey, who was his roommate on the road for about 6 or 7 years, and they were known to be very close. But not, I don't think Gehrig, he was known as being a reserved personality. He wasn't somebody who just spilled out whatever was on his mind. And let's put it this way, from what I have found, what I have read, he never unburdened himself this way. He was trying to stay optimistic. The doctors at the Mayo Clinic were trying to keep him optimistic and trying to keep his hopes up, even though they knew that his illness was terminal. Eleanor, his wife, tried to keep it from him that his illness was terminal, although Gehrig, by all indications, did figure out that he was not going to get better, because as time went on, one part of him after another kept sort of falling useless. He did manage, I didn't mention this earlier, he did manage to get out to Yankee Stadium even in 1940. He would sit in the dugout sometimes with the team and just kind of watch and root them on. But Babe Dahlgren, who's the first baseman who replaced Gehrig, he told a story about he offered Gehrig a cigarette, but Gehrig couldn't grasp the cigarette with his own hand. Dahlgren had to put it, in his mouth. But Gehrig kept smoking. He had ALS, but he kept smoking all the way to the end, which is another funny thing. Yes, more questions. Yes, Grady.
Yeah, I'm never. I keep forgetting what the A in ALS stands for. I just never can remember that.
Amyotrophic.
Amyotrophic. That's right. Thank you.
Amyotrophic.
And sorry.
Lateral sclerosis.
Mr. Joseph? Hello?
Hmm?
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah.
David.
Hi. I'm the fella who had visited Gehrig's gravesite and saw that they had the wrong date for his birth. And when you talk about his family, that's when they said, well, yes, we've heard that before, but under the laws of the state of New York, in order to change a tombstone date, somebody from the family has to do it. And there was no family member, so it's going to stay that way. And I actually found Jonathan Eig on Twitter, and I sent him a picture of the tombstone, and he said that he had been there several times and never noticed the wrong date. He said he was going to look into it, and he took my contact information, and he checked with the Yankees, and the Yankees said that yes, they had been informed many years ago about that, and they had drawn a blank in being able to make any kind of change, which is kind of strange.
The Yankees, they drew a blank. Is that what you said?
Yes, yeah. Apparently the Yankees looked into it, and once again, it must have been something to do with no family members are able to then get it changed. Even though both the Yankees and the funeral, the cemetery people have been shown that the date's wrong, et cetera, et cetera.
Interesting.
And I did actually have another, actually a question.
Yeah.
Well, at that time, was ALS deemed to be incurable? So did he know from the outset that he was going to die from this, and he did not have long to live?
The disease had been discovered and defined in the 1860s, but then there really hadn't been any new research into it. Doctors had no idea how to treat it. And if you were a general practitioner in 1939, you may have heard of this, but probably you hadn't seen it, you hadn't treated it. It was only about 2,500 Americans got the disease each year. Now, actually, the first doctor that Gehrig went to, diagnosed him with a gallbladder issue. This guy had no idea what was going on with ALS. And Gehrig he didn't get a diagnosis till he went to the Mayo Clinic, and he met with a doctor whose mother had died of ALS and was able to spot it almost instantly. But the public was barely aware of the disease. And when the Mayo Clinic doctor, he wrote a letter kind of explaining it, announcing it, he compared it to infantile paralysis or polio. He kind of described it as a form of polio. And that kind of lodged in the public's mind. Okay, Gehrig has a form of polio or something like polio. And a lot of people, now everyone knew his career was over because obviously with polio, you can't play baseball. But they didn't really appreciate the fact that he didn't have long to live. And I don't know, I think Gehrig did figure out that he was going to die, but I don't know if he knew it would be so soon after he was diagnosed. He lived less than 2 years after he was diagnosed, which is short. Dr. Bedlack, the Duke University researcher, I asked him, Gehrig, he was so strong, he was so durable. Did that help him in the fight against ALS at all? And he said, no. He lasted 2 years after diagnosis. That's actually kind of short. It's average at best. It's probably on the short side. Gehrig's strength, in my opinion, may have helped him keep playing baseball. Most athletes, there have been a few other athletes who got diagnosed with this, and most of them had to stop playing pretty quickly because the first thing that the disease does to you is rob you of your speed and your coordination and your reflexes. But Gehrig found other ways to contribute by walking to get on base instead of getting a hit, that kind of thing. Yeah, so did he know, did the public know that it was terminal? In 1939, no, the answer would have to be no. next, more questions. David Newman.
I've heard this from a pathologist, that there is some speculation that he may have had CTE as well. He did play football, the helmets in those days. Have you ever heard anything like that? Have they picked up on that?
Well, I remember when that came out about 10 years ago. Again, until the Mayo Clinic releases the records, I guess there's no way to know 100% for certain. But Gehrig, you know, he did get hit in the head with pitches twice, I think, in 1933 and 1934. And, you know, it's funny, after one of the games, he got knocked unconscious, but he came back and hit 3 triples the next day. But it wasn't like he was playing football, you know, and
He did
suffering.
in college, didn't he?
Hmm?
He did at Columbia?
He did, yeah. He did he played football in high school, and he played football for one season at Columbia back in the leather helmet days. But I don't think, you know, he just, I don't know, that just doesn't seem like enough to cause the kind of massive brain damage that would lead to the paralysis and the early death. I mean, you hear that happening with football players. Yeah. But, you know, there have been plenty of other baseball players from that time who suffered hits to the head, you know, severe concussions, and they went on and lived, you know, extended lives, maybe not, you know, age 90, but they lived a normal lifespan. So I personally doubt it, and I'd say that the vast majority of doctors and researchers who study ALS also doubt that. I know, you know, it was a theory that was put out there, but I don't believe it. But I'm not a doctor. I don't play one on TV. You know, that's just my opinion.
That's okay. I'll tell my cousin he was wrong.
Were medical professionals in the 1930s aware of CTE?
Were they aware of it?
Yeah, I mean, did they know what it was?
I think in those days, if you had sports concussions and you were left like boxers, for example, or football players, you know, people could tell that you had suffered some lasting damage. You know, and they would say, "Oh, he's punch drunk. He took one too many blows to the head." But like in terms of a real understanding of CTE and the damage that it causes, that I don't think that had developed yet.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, Grady.
I just had one question. Is it true that after Lou died, his wife Eleanor, his widow Eleanor, spent the rest of her life helping research for ALS treatment?
I think she was involved in various fundraisers, not just for ALS, but for other muscular diseases too. I wouldn't say it wasn't like a full-time occupation. Eleanor had she lived for more than 40 years after he died, and she did several interesting things. She was involved in the movie in Pride of the Yankees and helping the scriptwriters with that. And if you ever watch the movie, you can definitely tell it's Eleanor's perspective on a lot of things, especially with her mother-in-law.
Watched it plenty of times.
You what?
Watched it plenty of times.
Watched it plenty of times. Okay.
Love that movie.
And then she got involved in war bond drives during World War II. She was involved somehow in the creation of the All-American Football Conference in the late 1940s. I don't know exactly what she did, but she had some role in that. And then later on, she would go to Yankee old-timer games, and she did some ALS research, and she would, not research, fundraising. And she would write newspaper columns sometimes. But it was actually a little bit of a sad and lonely existence for her because she was always Lou Gehrig's widow. You know, she couldn't, how could she marry anybody who could compare to that? And so she lived, I think, until 1984. And then she's buried with Lou at Kensico Cemetery. More questions? Anyone?
Did
Yes.
Babe Ruth visit him when he was retired? Or
Say
any
it
of the
again?
Yankees, really? Did Babe Ruth or any of the Yankees visit him at his home while after he quit?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. A lot of them did. In fact, he had a lot of visitors at his home. The current Yankees like Bill Dickey, Joe McCarthy, Tommy Henrik, the guys who were his friends. And then there were a lot of entertainers who would come by because Eleanor wanted to keep him preoccupied. So she would arrange for a lot of people to come by. And I think Babe Ruth did come by here and there as well. I mean, he and Gehrig had, after maybe 1934, had a kind of a strained relationship. Their personalities were too different for them to really get along. But I think he did visit, and then Ruth attended the funeral when that happened.
Was it pallbearer?
Gehrig was cremated. Yeah, which always struck me as interesting. I'm not sure why he was cremated, and my theory is that when he was alive, people had a fascination with his body, with him being able to play so many consecutive games, and maybe Eleanor didn't want him to be, dissected or studied, or violated in any way. So, but I don't know why he was cremated.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Let me think. I wanted to play. Oh, there's something I forgot to mention. I wanted to play a clip for you. In 1939, before he was diagnosed, January of '39, before he was diagnosed with ALS, but Gehrig took part in a fundraising campaign for the March of Dimes, and they were raising money to fight polio, another paralytic disease. And it seems to me that this might have been another sign that Gehrig sensed something was seriously wrong with his body. Anyway, he appeared on a radio show called Gangbusters. And this is a clip that has never been in circulation anywhere. You can't find it on YouTube. You'll never see it in a documentary or anything. I'm going to play it. I hope you can hear it.
Destroys health and sometimes lives, especially the health and happiness of our children. And tonight, Gangbusters gives its support for a crusade against this enemy. As you know, at this time of the year, all America joins together to fight the enemy of infantile paralysis through the celebration of the birthday of the President of the United States, Franklin D. Roosevelt. I am happy indeed to be here tonight to ask all of you, the friends of Gangbusters, to join the March of Dimes and so contribute to the war on infantile paralysis. I have a teammate here with me, General U.S. Johnson, who will tell you at the end of tonight's program how each of you can help carry on this crusade against one of our most terrible public enemies. Thank you, Lou Gehrig. And now, Superintendent Fallon, you say this game's adjournment.
All right. The man you heard speaking at the end there, that was Colonel Norman Schwarzkopf Sr., the father of Stormin' Norman from the Gulf War. Was everybody able to make that out? Were you able to hear him?
It was very low. I had to put my ear down to my speakers.
Okay. Right. Well, yeah, I put it right next to the mic. I'm not sure where the microphone is on my computer here. I can play it again if you need to hear it. Wait, let me.
Jennings and
Let's just try this one more time.
For more than 3 years, gangbusters have been carrying on a crusade against crime. But there is another type of public enemy abroad in our great country. It destroys health and sometimes lives. Health and happiness of our children. Tonight, gangbusters support a crusade against this. No. All America joins together of infantile paralysis. Of the President of the United States, Roosevelt. I am happy indeed to be here tonight. The friends of gangbusters to join the March of Dimes and so contribute to the war on infantile paralysis. Teammate here with me, General U.S. Johnson, who will tell you at the end of tonight's program how each of you can help carry on this crusade against one of our most terrible public enemies. Thank you, Lou Gehrig. And now, Superintendent.
Okay. So I hope you heard it a little better that time.
Was that Gehrig's voice?
Yes.
That's what he says. The first time in my life that I've ever known what he sounded like. Never had an idea of what he liked. Everybody in the movie did. Everybody's in all the movies never sounded like him.
Yeah. You could really hear the New York accent in that. I don't know if you could hear it. You hear him say "birthday." I actually have now. I have another clip which is clearer of Gehrig. This is now. You may have heard the story. He was on radio once. He was doing an advertisement. He was supposed to do an advertisement for Husky's cereal, and the announcer asked him, "Lou, what do you eat for breakfast every day?" And this is live radio, and he said, "I eat a bowl of Wheaties." And this, and of course, this got national press coverage that he made this error on live network radio. This isn't some local New York sports station. This was on a national. This was on Ripley's Believe It or Not, actually. So a few months later, they had him back on the show, and they couldn't help but make fun of it. And Gehrig sort of went along with the gag, and so now you can really hear his voice more clearly in this one.
Say, Lou, switching from baseball to another topic for the moment, I understand that your manager, Christy Walsh, has arranged with Saul Lesser, the movie producer, for you to star in a picture in Hollywood. Is that right? That's right, Ford. I'm going to have a pretty good role, I guess. But as for being a star, that's another thing. It's pretty tough to make the big leagues in Hollywood. Well, Lou, if you play in as many movies as you have baseball games, you'll be a star, all right? And you can keep in shape out there, too, if you'll start off the day by diving into a big bowl of husky. That's a real load off my mind, Ford. Because seriously, I do go for Huskies in a big way. They're the best tasting cereal I ever ate, and I guess I've tried them all. Well, thank you, and good luck to you.
Did you hear that one?
At the beginning, but then it faded.
Sounded better when you had the phone in front of the computer.
It faded when I put the phone in front of the computer?
No, it sounded better when you had the phone in front of the computer.
The first 10 seconds were clear, but then it faded.
All right, hold on. Try this again.
Say, Lou, switching from baseball to another topic for the moment.
Is that good?
I understand that your manager, Christy Walsh, has arranged with Saul Lesser, the movie producer, for you to star in a picture in Hollywood. Is that right? Half right, Ford. I'm going to have a pretty good role, I guess. But as for being a star, that's another thing. It's pretty tough to make the big leagues in Hollywood. Well, Lou, if you play in as many movies as you have baseball games, you'll be a star, all right? And you can keep in shape out there, too, if you'll start off the day by diving into a big bowl of Huskies. That's a real load off my mind, Ford.
So you can, again, you can hear his New York accent coming through pretty clearly
Oh, yeah.
in that one. Yeah, that is what he sounded like. That was not a put on, or anything. He really spoke with that strong accent, and he didn't always speak with the echo you hear in the July 4th speech.
Well, Dan,
yes.
if you listen to the original July 4th speech, his accent is very clear. And I mean, there's no question about where he was raised. If you listen to that, his accent is I don't think either of the clips you played for us just now show the accent as strong as his final speech shows.
Yeah, the thing is, there's not so much echo on them, so it just sounds more natural. You can kind of get a sense of his natural rhythm of speaking.
Right.
Yeah. More questions, comments? Stephen.
This is more like a two-parter. You mentioned about Rawhide earlier. Were there any other offers in the works for Gehrig after he did the movie? And you mentioned about Eleanor Gehrig's input in Pride of the Yankees. How much input did the New York Yankees and Major League Baseball also have in the making of that film?
Well, in terms of Gehrig starring in another movie, Saul Lesser, his movie producer, signed him, I think, to a 2 or 3 picture contract. And Rawhide was released in March of '38. And I actually looked for some sort of box office returns to see how it did. I didn't see an overall figure, but I found scattered returns. It did well in Jacksonville, Florida, and it did okay in New York, and it did great in Detroit and other things like that. Overall, I think the picture did just average or maybe slightly above average business for a B-grade Western for what it was, And then when the season was over, the 1938 season was over, Saul Lesser, he put out an announcement that he wasn't going to make pictures with adults anymore. He wanted to focus on making pictures with kids, juvenile stars. Now, I think that was sort of his way of backing out of his contract with Gehrig and maybe some other actors who he had been employing. There were some people in Rawhide who had been in this producer's other movies. Smith Ballou, who was an actor and singer, and Evelyn Knapp, who was the lead actress in Rawhide. I think he was just sort of backing out of all of these contracts because about a year later, he turned around and made a movie called Our Town, based on the Thornton Wilder play. And that, I think, wound up winning an Oscar. So basically, no, there were no further offers for Gehrig's movie career. Now, as far as Pride of the Yankees goes, Eleanor helped write the script. No, she didn't help write the script. She gave the script writers and the producer a lot of information, which wound up shaping the final product. And then Major League Baseball, I don't think the commissioner's office was involved in the movie, but there were quite a few players who were involved. The producers did recruit Babe Ruth to appear in the movie as himself. They thought for authenticity's sake, they needed Ruth. And Ruth agreed and had to lose 50 pounds to play himself in the movie. Bill Dickey was also in the movie. I think he had a couple lines. He had a couple scenes. And then for the long-range scenes, they brought in other baseball players. I think a couple Yankees. Mark Coing was in there. I want to say Bob Musial, who was left fielder for the 27 Yankees. And Babe Herman, who was a great hitter for the Brooklyn Dodgers in the early 30s. And he was sort of like the batting double for Gary Cooper, because Gary Cooper was not good at playing baseball, at looking convincing playing a baseball player. So Herman was sort of like the stunt double. And there might have been a few other players, but those are the ones who come to mind. Yes.
just as Roy Sievers was the stunt double for Tab Hunter in Gotta Have Heart and
Damn Yankees.
Damn Yankees.
Oh,
Yeah. None of those actors knew how to swing a bat.
no. No. Although I've read that Charlie Sheen, when he was making Field of Dreams, he was, as one of the Black Sox, he was
Major League, not Field of Dreams.
Major League. Okay, you're right. Major League. You're right. He was a very good baseball player and performed all his own plays. But yeah, generally speaking, yeah, they need doubles. Anything else? More questions?
Questions, guys? Comments?
Yes, Stephen.
One more thing on Babe Dahlgren, who you mentioned earlier. Other than the cigarette episode that they had between each other, did Babe Dahlgren, Lou Gehrig's successor, did they have any sort of relationship with each other after Gehrig was out of baseball?
Did Gehrig and Dahlgren have a relationship?
Well, in other words, did he give him any advice? Did he, give him any suggestions on anything? So I would just say professionally, what was his relationship like after Gehrig was out of the game?
He was very nice to Babe Dahlgren. He didn't begrudge him, like the first base position or anything. Although it's interesting, there were a few times after Gehrig left the lineup that, that sports writers would ask him, "What are you going to do now? Are you maybe going to get into managing?" And Gehrig said, "No, don't talk to me about managing. I'm still trying to get in the lineup." In as late as June of '39, he was saying somebody asked him to pose with Dahlgren, like have a picture at first base, and he wouldn't do it because he said, "I'm still going to get back in there at some point." And in fact, in June of '39, when the Yankees went to Kansas City to play their top minor league team in an exhibition game, Gehrig tried to play. This was, I think, June 3rd of '39, and he played 3 innings. And from what I read, Phil Rizzuto was actually on the Kansas City team, and he said Gehrig just looked terrible. There was a line drive, I think, to first base, and Gehrig managed to catch it, but it knocked him down. He fell down catching the ball. So Gehrig did harbor some kind of hope that he could somehow turn this around, but obviously it was too late. Yeah. What else? Yes, Grady.
One question: is the book available on Amazon? Your book?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Last Ride of the Iron Horse. You can buy it on Amazon, or you can buy it directly from Sunbury Press, which is the publisher. Yes. Our
host?
The host.
Yes. Peter.
Peter.
Dan,
Okay.
When was your book released?
It came out in June of last year, 2019. And it's going strong.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Questions, guys? Comments? We had a good attendance tonight, around 20 people on and off. And even Dee Bruce came back to the United States for this. How about that?
Did you have any trouble getting into Canada?
Oh yes, a lot of trouble, but we did unbelievable preparation so that our time at the border was less than 5 minutes.
Wow.
But that includes, 3 weeks of preparation before we went.
I thought they completely closed it.
They did, but if you have a daughter who lives there and is a citizen, then it's not closed to you.
She's.
That's the only way we got through.
Okay.
Have direct family.
And Rosalind's a citizen, right?
And Rosalind's a citizen too as well, but that she could have gone without me. Getting us both through was a little trickier. I'm the only one in my family that doesn't have dual citizenship. Hey, Dan, I think you did a great job. We appreciate you doing this tonight.
That was great. Yeah, enjoyed that.
Great
Look
job.
forward to reading it down the road, Dan. I really do. Where do you live, Dan?
Thank you very much. I appreciate this. I just want to mention I am working on, we were talking about concussions, and I wanted to mention this. I'm working on another book about a player who suffered many concussions, Pete Reiser, who was the great Brooklyn Dodger outfielder in the 40s, renowned for running into the Ebbets Field walls over and over and ruining his career. I don't know when it'll be out, but I'm maybe next year sometime. But I'm working on that one too, so keep an eye out for that.
Where do you live, Dan?
I was living in Olney, Maryland, and my wife and I, we're temporarily in Virginia Beach, but we're going to be moving up to Brunswick, Maryland, soon, as soon as the house is ready.
I hope to see you next summer at the convention.
Oh yeah. I was really looking forward to coming this summer, so I'll be there.
Very good. Very good.
Yeah. Well, thank you for having me.
Thanks
Really
again.
appreciate it.
Sign off.
Anybody else? Questions, comments? If not, we'll see you. The Called Shot lunch will be 2 weeks from today from noon to 2. And we'll have Jerry Armerick from Toronto speaking to us about Babe Ruth's legacy on being a superstar and being a marketing genius and all that kind of stuff. So hopefully one day we won't have COVID and we can actually see each other in person again. So.
Peter, I'd just like to mention that the chapter of SABR in Toronto is the only other chapter named for Babe Ruth. Because though it doesn't have his name, it has the name of the place where he hit his first professional in-season home run.
Babe Ruth hit his first home run in Toronto?
That's correct. He hit his only home run in Toronto in minor leagues.
Oh.
I thought maybe that was spring training in Fayetteville. Didn't he hit one in Fayetteville?
That's
spring
correct.
training.
That was spring training.
Spring training, yeah.
Yeah, the only regular season minor league game was hit in Toronto.
Oh.
As a member of the Providence minor league team.
Wow.
Or was it? It was Providence, not Bowling.
It was Providence, yeah, when Boston sent him down.
Oh, okay. The official minor league, yeah.
Yeah.
Affiliated.
Yeah. Organized baseball, as they call it.
Okay. Yeah.
All right. Well,
All the things you learn. I'm glad everybody was here. See a lot of familiar faces. So
Always fun.
Always fun. The Orioles lost. Last time I looked, the Nationals and Phillies were scoreless. So.
Yeah, I don't want to hear about the Orioles sweeping the Blue Jays, okay?
my son is a big Orioles fan.
Son's got good taste.
Some of us live a mile from Camden Yards and can't go to a game.
Oh.
Peter, I got your other team on the TV now.
Oh, the Cubs.
Cubs are playing the Pirates.
Yeah.
I just started.
I'm
top of the first inning.
I'm a Pirates man myself. I grew up in Pittsburgh.
Oh,
Very
I'm a
good.
Scranton native.
Are you
Very good.
Roberto Clemente or Willie Stargell fan?
Well, Clemente is a little bit before my time. So Stargell, I was big. I was there in '79 when.
Honus Wagner.
That's where all of us.
Actually, my grandmother used to tell stories. She knew Honus Wagner. She lived in Carnegie, PA, where he was from, and you would see him.
A guy that sat near me at Camden Yards years ago, he told me his grandfather, I guess, his grandfather's daughter babysat for Honus Wagner. I mean his kids, not when he was a baby.
Yeah. Wow.
I can match that one almost. My daughter used to babysit Matt Williams's kids in Scottsdale.
Wow.
The closest I can.
And verifiable.
The closest
And your bio said that you were one of the youngest people to ever attend a Pittsburgh Pirates World Series game. Was it 1971 or 79 or both of those against Orioles?
In '79, I went to Game 4 of the '79 World Series, and I was 9 years old at the time. And it's been so long, 41 years, and I must have been one of the youngest. I'm not going to say I'm the youngest person who was there, but one of the youngest people who were there. And so, there's probably no one left certainly under the age of 47, 48, who's been to a Pirates World Series game, and I don't think there's going to be one anytime soon.
Not with that attitude.
That attitude, I was just about to say.
I love the Pirates, but oof, you know, there's just.
Yeah. Oh, and at Cal Ripken's 21-31 game, there was a guy sitting in front of me. It was a guest of his son. He doesn't come regularly, but this guy was. I'm not sure if he was at Lou Gehrig's end or he saw Lou Gehrig play at least.
Oh yeah.
And he was at Ripken's, and I think Channel 11 reporter came up and interviewed him during the game.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that was cool.
Yeah.
He saw Lou Gehrig and then was at Ripken's.
The Yankees, Joe DiMaggio was at that game. Major League Baseball asked him to represent Gehrig and the Yankees at the game.
He said a few words on the field too.
He did? Oh, okay.
He did.
So words of, if I remember correctly, was he said some words of congratulations towards Cal.
Yes, yeah.
Right.
And I think he said that Gehrig would be proud that Ripken broke his record, something like that.
I think that's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well,
Dan, I think when people ask you the question about whether you're a Clemente or Stargell fan, you should reveal that you're a true SABR member and say, no, Fred Clark.
Actually, you know, my favorite player was Dave Parker.
The Cobra.
There you go.
Yeah, for at least for a few years, he was so incredible. I mean, he had a hard time. He basically replaced Clemente, and that was hard enough to step in those shoes. But he really, for at least I'd say 3 or 4 years, he really filled those shoes. He was the arm, and
I think I mostly remember his All-Star game throw.
Yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
It was a fantastic 30 for 30 on ESPN.
I saw that. Yeah.
I could probably find that.
Very, very well done, I thought.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Dan, did you come to the SABR convention in Pittsburgh?
No, I really didn't get involved in SABR until last year.
Okay.
Now since I went to the SABR meetings in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and I addressed the group in Columbia, Maryland.
Right.
And I've been reading some. I've written some SABR Games Project articles.
Very good.
Mainly on Gehrig and Pete Reiser. But I'm having a great time in this group. It's
the national convention was in Pittsburgh 2 years ago.
I wish I was part of it then, but yeah. I don't know. I never sort of. I normally don't. I'm not a joiner. You know, I don't join groups like this normally. But I'm glad I'm here.
Well, you know what? It's like a flock of eagles. Because a bunch of us are not joiners either, but we love baseball so much and love the history of baseball so much that when we get together, it's hard to go to one of these conventions and not go back every year.
Yeah.
They're just incredibly enjoyable.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, this is so right up my alley. I mean, this is the stuff, you know, no one wants to discuss this with me in normal daily life, but here, you know. It's
very true.
Yeah.
That's very true. All right, guys, I got to sign off.
Okay, see you, Bruce. Anybody else? Questions, comments?
I gotta go too.
All right, look for the email for the next meeting to come out in the next week or so.
Okay.
All right, guys. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Have a good night.
Have a good night.
Yeah.
Bye.